So tonight, when Pastor Stephen had asked me to speak, and I was praying about it, I really just felt led to not go crazy deep tonight, but just to kind of encourage some of you guys. So I want to just talk. I want to just be real with you guys tonight about some stuff that I have a feeling that some of you guys may be going through and may be dealing with. And I called it the waiting game tonight. And this is funny because I hate waiting. I hate waiting for you. I'm so impatient. My personality is if I see something that looks remotely good or something that I think is remotely good for me, I go after it. Like I don't think about it. I go, and it gets me in trouble sometimes, and sometimes it pays off. But I don't really like that about myself. I wish I could just take a step back and think about it. But when something gets in my head, I pursue it. I'm like a dog, man. I'm on it. I'm on the scent. And for me, waiting is one of the hardest things that I can do, especially when it comes to something that's out of my control. And in my spiritual walk, when there's things that I feel like maybe God is bringing me into something, or maybe he's promised me something, and then I have to sit and wait, that's one of the hardest things that God can ask me to do. If he asked me to go do something, if I know God asked me, Scott, I need you to go to Africa and I need you to do this, it'd be hard. I'm not saying it'd be easy, but at least I'm doing something. But when he just says, man, I need you to sit and I need you to wait in this time, or it's not time yet, man, I struggle with that. And the reason that I struggle with that is, or not even the reason, but really what that's saying from my heart is, God, I think I know better, or I don't trust you with my best intentions. I think that if I could do this, I would go now, or I would go here, or I would do that. When God is saying, man, I want to teach you something, and I want you just to stand still for a little bit. And I suspect that some of you guys may find yourself in a waiting period. Young adults is that funny age where we're kind of in between things. Maybe some of you guys in here just graduated high school, or some of you are in college, maybe some of you graduated college, so now you're kind of in between the education side of things and not just like a summer job, but a career. You're kind of like waiting for that door to open and waiting to see where you're supposed to go or what you're supposed to do with your degree. Some of you guys in here may be looking for that committed relationship now. Not that high school fling, but you're looking for that committed thing, and you're not finding anything yet. And then you're like, God, what's up, man? Where's she at? Where's he at? And you're kind of in between there. Maybe some of you guys are still living with mom and dad, or maybe you have roommates, maybe you're in a dorm, and you're like, man, I really want to get out on my own, but Long Island is so retardedly expensive, that's not happening, and I'm kind of stuck in between. Young adults, we just tend to be in an in-between spot for a while. And, people that I grew up with, I've seen some people do it the right way and wait on God, wait on provision, and then I've seen other people get to that place where they've waited and they're like, nothing's happening, so I'm just going to go do it on my own. And I'm going to do it my own way. And I can't tell you how many friends I have that are doing the bar thing and the club thing right now, looking for the one. And I'm like, do you really think you're going to find what you're looking for in that? Right? I'm sure you guys all have friends like that too. Or you have the people that are like, you know what, I can't just sit around, so I'm just going to go hard after this career. Nothing else matters. I'm so career-driven, and my church attendance is slacking. My friends, my encouragement is slacking. My family time is slacking, but I just got to get here. I got to get this job. I got to get in this door. I got to move to the city. I got to move to Brooklyn and get an apartment. How many people hear that? And everything else just gets left on the side. So tonight I want to talk about the waiting game. I want to talk about why we have to wait, how much it sucks, what the reason is. And again, I'm speaking this to me because I hate doing this. I hate this part, but it's a necessary part and it's a big part. So when we think about waiting, when we think about somebody in the Bible who had to wait for provision, there's no better example in the Bible than Joseph. Joseph was the back-to-back MVP of the waiting game, okay? He knew what it was like to wait. And what we're going to do tonight is we're going to just look at a few snapshots of Joseph's story. And if you don't know about this guy named Joseph, man, I encourage you, go home tonight, this week, read about him, man. You can, in Genesis 37 through 50, you can read about this guy's story. And if you find yourself in this in-between stage, this is going to be an encouragement to you because this guy is really a good example of what we should do. So basically, this guy was the 11th of 12 sons to Jacob. 12 sons. Talk about sibling rivalry and sibling competition. I thought it was hard to share a room with one sibling. I can't imagine 12 dudes all bunched up in a little hut. That must have been interesting. Yeah, and very stinky, very stinky. Locker room smell to the max. So he was the 11th of 12 sons, and the funny thing is that he was obviously the second to the youngest. But Joseph had so much favor on him, even from a young age. Joseph had leadership qualities, to the point where his father even had him looking over his older brothers, which I'm sure, as you can imagine, did not sit well with his older brothers. We all know about the robe, the coat of many colors that some of you guys who grew up in church remember the flannelgram in Sunday school where they had like the flannel thing that stuck. I just still remember that. And I was always the guy that was like, yo, that coat's ugly, man. I would never, you know what a rainbow means, right? Joseph did. I don't think Joseph knew what he was putting on. So Joseph had the coat of many colors, which really in that time was an honor because that was an expensive robe. It was something that was awesome that his dad made for him and gave to him. But again, as you can imagine, being the second to the youngest, his brothers weren't really into that whole thing of their little brother being over them. And really the story starts to pick up steam in chapter 37. If you have your Bibles, you can turn there. We're going to start in verse 5. And what happens is Joseph has a dream. And as we're going to read, after he has this dream, his life takes a drastic turn. But this is what happens. Verse 5 says this. Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. He said to them, listen to this dream I had. We were bringing sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it. His brother said to him, do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us? And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. Then he had another dream. This guy dreams a lot. And he told it to his brothers. Listen, I had another dream, and this time the sun and moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me. When he told his father as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, what is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you? His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. So this dream, we know that it was of God because we have the privilege of seeing the end result. So we know that this was a promise of God. It wasn't like he had Taco Bell at midnight and then crazy things happened that night and he had some weird dreams. This guy had a dream from God. He had a promise from God, and it was pretty specific. And some of you guys in here may be coming in tonight with some ideas of a promise that God gave you. Maybe you're holding on to a general promise of, man, I know God has my best intentions in mind. I know God has that perfect spouse for me, which I completely believe. Maybe you guys are saying, man, I know God has that career that I've been longing for. I feel like he put in my heart at a young age. Maybe you're saying, I know that God has a place in some sort of ministry for me. Not full-time maybe, but just doing something. Maybe you're holding on to, I know that God wants to restore some things in my family, or I know that God has some financial provision that he's promised me because I know that he wants to bless me. Maybe you're holding on to something like that, or maybe you have something specific like Joseph did. Maybe through a dream or a vision, maybe through a word from somebody, maybe just God putting it on your heart. He said something specific pertaining to your specific situation that you're going through. And when you read about this, when you hear a sermon about it, about a promise, when you get a word from somebody, you're like, yeah, woo, that's awesome. And then you go home that night and you're like, now what? You know, and then days start to pass and then months start to pass, maybe years start to pass, and you're like, what the heck? What was that? Was that God? Was that wrong? Was I thinking something? Was that lady drunk who gave me that word? What happened? How come I haven't seen this come to pass? How come I haven't seen anything start to happen? Well, Joseph's was pretty specific, and we see his life, like I said a second ago, take a drastic turn once this happens. Now, when I heard this story as a little kid, I used to be like, this guy's a moron. What kind of arrogant, prideful jerk would go to his brothers and be like, yo, you're going to bow down to me? And I didn't like Joseph when I would read it as a kid, but the older I get, the more I read it, I really think that it wasn't so much out of arrogance that he was telling this dream. I think it was out of ignorance. I think being younger, and I think he just didn't understand. Sometimes something may be true, but you don't really need to say it. You know what I mean? Sometimes you can kind of speak truth in a way that's a little cutting, you know, and sometimes it's better to keep your mouth shut, or say it in love. And something like this, I really don't understand what was going on through his head when he opened his mouth to his brothers. If I was an older brother, I'd probably want to punch him in the face too. But what happens is Joseph tells his brothers, he tells his father, as you can imagine, his brothers hated him all the more. His brothers wanted to kill him. That's how much they were angry at him. Things were crazy back then, man. It wasn't like, dude, let's not invite him to family parties anymore. They jumped right to like, yo, dude, how are we going to take care of this guy? Let's take him out. And one of the brothers was like, look, let's not kill him. He was the voice of reason. He's like, let's not kill him. Let's just stage his death, and we'll sell him into slavery, which sucks too. I mean, that's not like it's that much better. But so they staged his death to show the father that they want the father to think that he was killed, and they sell him into slavery. Now, I can imagine Joseph is feeling a little confused and conflicted at this point of like what just happened. I don't know. I was on cloud nine thinking I was going to be king all of a sudden, and then now I'm like in a pit. Now I'm sold into slavery. What's going on? And I'm sure he had some crazy thoughts going on in his head. And what's crazy is little did he know that this waiting process that just started was going to take over the next 13 years of his life. 13 years. So many of us, I mean, I'll speak for me. I'm like, I just make plans in my head. I'm a planner. I'm a thinker. I'm a schemer. That's as much as I don't want to say that, I do. I like think things out, and I don't know why I'm saying that, but I like to plan things in my head. And so many of us are like, yeah, I'm going to graduate high school. I'm going to go to this college. I'm going to get this scholarship, or mommy and daddy, you're going to pay for it. And I'm going to enjoy it. I'm going to have fun. I might date a couple girls, do whatever. And then I'm going to, probably around my junior year, I'm going to meet her. We're going to date for probably like 6 to 8 months. And then, I don't know, like maybe the summer before my senior year, I'll propose. We'll get engaged. She'll love me. She'll want to come alongside my career. She'll want to be a mommy to all my babies. After my senior year, I think we'll get married. And right after the wedding, probably the next weekend, I will start the first day of my new career. And buy my house a few months after that. Pop out a few little ones. And we will be set. We'll find a nice church to get involved in. And then what happens is it's all good. You're just having fun the first 2 years of college, and then you get to your junior year, and you're still single, and all your friends are married, and you're like, all right, it's okay. I'll find her my senior year, and we'll just have a 6-month engagement instead of a year. And then you get to your senior year, no girl. And then now you're like planning graduation parties and all that, and now you're like, oh God, what is going on, man? I know you're teaching me something, but I'm getting a little nervous. And then you graduate college, and then you move back home, move back with mom and dad maybe, and then you're like, man, I gotta get out of here. I gotta find somebody, and then some time passes, and then you're like, oh man, well. Think about 13 years of that. Think about 13 years of that. And not only just waiting, but all the stuff we're about to read about is unbelievable, okay? It's crazy. So Joseph was sold into slavery. He ended up at a guy named Potiphar's house, who was one of Pharaoh's officials, okay? And what I love about Joseph, what you're going to see is that through this bad situation, bad situation, he's diligent with the day-to-day. He keeps up on what he's supposed to do. He sticks to his guns. He does the walk day to day. And what happens is even with Potiphar, it says in 39:3, the Lord was with him and he gave him success in everything he did. That's Joseph with Potiphar. To the point where he ended up working his way up as a slave to be second in command just to Potiphar. He was in charge of all of Potiphar's stuff. Potiphar loved this guy so much. He trusted this guy so much. They said, hey man, I want you to keep track of everything. I want you to do everything. So this guy I'm sure, was devastated when his brothers did this. I'm sure he was confused and conflicted. He kept up with the day-to-day. God helped him. He ended up moving up to being in charge of all this guy's stuff. So he took the bad. He made it good. He was doing good. And then all of a sudden, Potiphar's wife, I don't know if she was having a midlife crisis or what, but she just all of a sudden wanted to get freaky with Joseph. And Joseph was like, I can't do that. I'm not going to do that. Man, this guy trusts me with all of his stuff. I can't do that. He was a man of integrity, a man of character. So she grabbed his clothes, man, and started yelling that he was trying to rape her to everybody. Again, imagine what's going on in this guy's head. Like, are you kidding me? I'm doing everything that I'm supposed to do. And now I'm going to get accused of this? So when Potiphar hears about it, he throws him in prison. Now this guy finds himself in prison years later. I can't imagine, again, what's going on in his head, thinking back to these dreams that he had and thinking, are you kidding me, God? Are you kidding me? You give me these promises, and look at what's happened since then. But Joseph, he somehow continues to do what he's supposed to do. He continues to live it out day to day, to the point where now even the prison guard sees the leadership in Joseph, and he puts him over the other inmates in prison. You talk about a good attitude. Talk about a faithful servant, huh? Dude, at this point, I'd be like, oh, heck no. I'm doing my own thing. God, if you're going to let me end up here, forget you, man. I'm doing me now. But Joseph stuck with it. And then it comes to a part where we see these two dudes come into the prison where he's at. And again, we see some crazy stuff happen. In verse 1 of chapter 40, it says, sometime later, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt offended their master, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was angry with his two officials, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, and put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, in the same prison where Joseph was confined. The captain of the guard assigned them to Joseph, and he attended them. After they had been in custody for some time, each of the two men, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were being held in prison, had a dream the same night. And each dream had a meaning of its own. Now, pay attention to this verse because we're going to come back to it in a few minutes. When Joseph came to them the next morning, he saw that they were dejected. So he asked Pharaoh's officials who were in custody with him in his master's house, why do you look so sad today? And they began to tell him they both had dreams. And Joseph interpreted the baker's dream. You're going to die, dude. You're going to be hung. And sorry, but that's what it means. And he interpreted the cupbearer's dream as through some series of events, your position to Pharaoh is actually going to be restored. You're going to end up back in Pharaoh's kingdom and doing what you were going to do. And he tells the cupbearer, listen, when this happens, I know this is what this dream means, and I know that this is what God is saying. When this happens, when your position is restored, remember me. Don't forget about me. Tell Pharaoh about me. Cupbearer's like, yeah, man, thanks. I appreciate it. That was awesome. I really appreciate that. He gets restored to his position, just like Joseph predicts. And guess what? The dude forgets all about him. All about him. So Joseph waits another 2 years, stuck in prison. Again, I don't even have to say it. What is this guy thinking right now? 2 years later, Pharaoh has a dream. And Pharaoh is so disturbed by this dream, he doesn't know what it means. So he's looking throughout the kingdom for all the magicians, the sorcerers, I don't know if they have wizards or whatever, whoever was back there that then to say, hey, what does this dream mean? No one could figure it out. No one could understand what the dream meant. And all of a sudden, this moron remembers, oh yeah, there was this guy in prison that I was supposed to tell you about. He interpreted my dream and it came true. Maybe he could do the same for you. So Pharaoh summons for this guy to come. Joseph comes before Pharaoh. He listens to the dream. He interprets Pharaoh's dream as, look, God is saying that there's going to be 7 years of plenty for the kingdom, that it's going to be awesome, man. The economy is going to be booming. Food is going to be there. But then after that, there's going to be 7 years of a famine, and it's going to be terrible, man. It's going to wipe the people out if you don't plan accordingly. And Pharaoh was so blown away with this interpretation and so blown away and impressed with Joseph that he takes him out of prison and he puts him second in command of the entire nation. The entire nation. How crazy is that? Now picture now what's going on in Joseph's head. I can't imagine the elation that he feels of 13 years of garbage happening to him that he can't even control, 13 years of this stupid waiting game happening, and now all of a sudden it almost seems like things are starting to happen the way that God had promised him. So just as he predicted, there were 7 years of plenty. Joseph was diligent. Again, still in the day-to-day, he put away the grain, he put away the resources that they had, and then 7 years of famine came after that. And he had enough, because of the planning and his discipline, he had enough saved up that he was able to save that entire nation. And what ends up happening is that Joseph's family ends up running out of food, they end up starving, and his dad sends his brothers to Egypt, not knowing it's Joseph, to beg for food. And it ends up happening, those of you guys who know the story, They end up before Joseph, not realizing it's their brother, begging for mercy, begging for food, which obviously is the fulfillment of this dream and this promise that Joseph had 13 years ago. And Joseph ends up telling them, with tears in his eyes, who he is. And he ends up saving them. And this is what he says in 15:20. It says, Joseph said to them, don't be afraid. Because as you can imagine, they were probably like, oh, crap, man, that's Joseph. That's that dude that we did really dirty 13 years ago. But he says, do not be afraid. Am I in the place of God? He says, you intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. It goes on to say that he wept loudly when he was talking to his brothers. And we just see this picture of Joseph just being so broken at this point. It wasn't even like he was in a position like, yeah, what? I told you this was going to happen, man. His heart was broken. He wasn't like lording over them as we saw 13 years ago. He was in such a different place of life at this point. And what was awesome, he says the saving of many lives. They didn't even realize at that point what that meant, because he didn't only just save Egypt, but Jacob's other son, Judah, is the bloodline of Israel, is the bloodline of Jesus, that Jesus came from. Joseph saved 2 nations. And how did he do that? Did he do that by pursuing this thing by himself? Really, he did it by just doing the day-to-day. When everything was going wrong, when he was in the middle of this waiting process, Joseph ends up saving 2 entire nations. God's fulfillment, God's plan ends up coming too. And whether he wanted to or not, he wasn't even able to try to do it on himself, because things just kept happening to him that were out of his control. But what I admire so much about Joseph, what I pray that I could someday just be a fraction of, is that he didn't get so consumed with, man, my life sucks. What happened? I can't believe all this is happening to me, man. He stayed diligent in the day-to-day. He stayed faithful in the day-to-day. He did what God had called him to that day. And what ended up happening is through all this adversity and all these hard times, he ends up walking through the day-to-day and ends up exactly where God promised him that he would be. The miracle, the testimony that this guy has, that we have the privilege of reading, is unbelievable. Unbelievable. And I'm just hitting the high spots. That's what I'm saying. Go home and read this. This story is crazy. Crazy. And so many times, man, we have these promises. We have these things that we feel like God owes us. And when it doesn't happen, we start to get bitter. We start to get a bad attitude. We start to doubt. We start to wander. We start to try to do it in our own way and in our own power. One of everyone's favorite verses. This thing's quoted more than any other verse. For I know the plans I have for you, right? Says the Lord. Plans to prosper you, not to harm you. Plans to give you a hope and a future. Jeremiah 29:11. That's an awesome verse. Man, I use that all the time with my youth. But so many people leave out the next verse. Verse 12 says, then, connecting it to the first, then you will call upon me and come and pray to me, and I will hear you. You will seek me and you will find me when. Also connecting it. You will seek me, you will find me when you seek me with all of your heart. And you see, that's the key, because he got the promise. He knew that God wanted to prosper him. He knew that God had plans for him. It didn't go the way that he envisioned. It didn't go the way he thought it was going to go. But guess what? He still continued to seek God. He still continued to give his life to God day to day to day to day. And he ended up exactly where God promised him he would be. Now, it's easy for us to be like, well, that's awesome, because we're seeing the story from like a bird's eye view, right? We get to see the whole thing. I get to read a couple chapters later what happened. So I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, he followed God. But man, put yourself in his shoes. Imagine getting a word like that and finding yourself in slavery. We can't even wrap our minds around that, being in America. Find yourself in slavery. Find yourself in prison. Find yourself being accused of rape. And this guy had such a heart for God that he continued to seek God day to day to day. See, he was used by God throughout the process because he focused on God. He was less focused on what God had promised him, and he was more focused on God. And because of that, God used him throughout the process. See, we hear so many sermons about promises, which are awesome. We hear so many sermons about fulfillment and about the payoff, which is awesome. But the majority of it isn't the promise or the payoff. The majority of it is the process that you go through between the two. The majority of it is the waiting game. And you know what? Young adult ministry is so awesome because there tends to be such a gap in churches. We have children's ministry, we have youth ministry, then all of a sudden we forget about young adults, and then we have adult ministry. And even just this year, we've revamped our young adult ministry too, because we started to see that we really didn't have a place for young adults. And that's why the table is so awesome. Because you guys are all going through the same thing. We're all in this together. We're all having to wait to see, God, what do you have for me the rest of my life? I don't know where I'm going to be in 10 years. I don't know where I'm going to be in 5 years. You guys are going through, I don't know who I'm going to marry. I don't know who I'm going to be with. I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know where I'm going to live. And to have something like this where you guys can come together and encourage each other, to uplift each other, to go through this waiting process together is incredible. And you know what? If you were ever going to pick a time in your life to be in the center of God's will, I would argue that this is the most important time. Because this is the time where you are going to be picking who you're going to marry, where you are going to be picking what you're going to do, where you are going to be picking where you're going to live. You got some big, big decisions in the next 10 years. And if I ever wanted to be in God's will, if I ever wanted to be close to God, if I ever wanted to be seeking him, it's now. And I want to encourage you tonight, man. If you find yourself you came in here tonight just feeling so discouraged. You know, people are embarrassed to say, I can't find anybody to date. I'm just going to be real with you guys. It's easy to be I'm not sure what I'm going to do with my life. I don't know where I'm going to live. Everyone goes through that. But people get awkward when it's so you dating anybody? No, not dating anybody. But I am going to 7 young adult groups trying to find somebody. But for real, man, that's hard. And that's real life, man. Don't be embarrassed about that. That's tough. All my best friends right now are in that situation. And it's I have the privilege, I'm married right now, but when I talk to them, my heart breaks for them because I remember that feeling of wanting to be in a relationship like that and not seeing anybody and not knowing where it was going to come from and feeling, am I ever going to get married? Maybe, did God call me to not be married and go somewhere? All those crazy thoughts. I remember what that feels like. And maybe you came in here tonight just discouraged, being man, I'm trying to do this God's way. I'm trying to be a good Christian. I'm trying to be close to God. I'm not looking for a person in where the world looks, and I'm not finding anything. I feel like God isn't listening. God isn't bringing anybody here. Man, I want to encourage you, don't give up. Stay faithful in the day-to-day. So many people forfeit the payoff because they faint in the process. So many people give up when it gets hard, and they never get to see the fulfillment of the promise. And I want to encourage you tonight, don't give up. Don't get to the point where you're just all right, I'm going to do this on my own. And so many times, just from seeing this, so many times it's right before God's about to bring breakthrough that someone gives up, when it gets the hardest. Man, push through. Be an encouragement to one another. Guys, man, lift each other up. You know what you guys struggle with? Ladies, do what you do. I don't know what you guys do, but help each other out. Be an encouragement to one another. Listen, the payoff to the promise doesn't occur when you're seeking the payoff. It occurs when you're seeking God. If you keep your eyes on what you're supposed to, if you keep your heart pointed towards what you're supposed to, the payoff is going to come. And listen, it's not your responsibility to make the outcome happen. Don't put that pressure on yourself. Don't put that pressure, that responsibility of I need to figure this out. I need to make this happen. No, that's not your responsibility. Because he who began a good work in you is going to bring it to completion. Nobody has your best interest in mind more than God. Nobody knows you more than the person that created you. Nobody knows your characteristic. Nobody knows your flaws and your quirks more than God. Nobody knows who's more compatible for you than anybody else. Jesus, God, who created you, knows exactly who he has for you, knows exactly what he has for you, when he has it for you. So trust in the fact, man, that you have a Father in heaven that wants nothing short of the absolute best for you. That doesn't make it easy. That doesn't make it easy to wait. I know. Like I said in the beginning, I'm terrible at that. But let me tell you something. You may not realize it as you're going through it, but you are growing throughout the process. It may not seem like it because it might be gradual, maybe because you're distracted and focused on other things, but you are growing throughout the process. We see such a difference in Joseph. Like I said in the beginning, when I said, hey, take note of this verse, we see in the beginning when Joseph, as a young, immature kid, didn't have the head knowledge to be conscious of the fact of maybe I shouldn't share this dream with my brothers, right? He was a little ignorant. You fast forward through this process, before the provision, before the fulfillment, and you see that Joseph woke up and he noticed the dejected look on the two men's faces. You see the difference there? That this young kid who didn't even think enough, like, I shouldn't say this, without anybody saying anything, noticed. He was sensitive enough to say, hey man, there's something wrong with these guys. See, God was working through Joseph. Joseph wasn't ready for the provision. Joseph wasn't ready for the fulfillment at that point. There was a process that he needed to go through in order to be ready for all that God had for him. And you know what? If he would have seen what God had for him, probably would have overwhelmed him. I really believe that if you could have a 2-minute trailer of what your life would entail, what God really had for you, it might overwhelm you. You may be like, what? How am I ever going to get there? God doesn't want you to shoulder that responsibility. All he asks of you is, man, trust me. Walk with me. So many young people will say to me, and I go through this too. I will say this too. I go through this too. God, I want your perfect will for my life. Right? How many of you guys have said that? God, I want your will for my life. What does that mean? Right? How do I get there? That's awesome to say. God, whatever you have for me, I want. All right. Now what? If you seek God's will for you tomorrow, and then you seek his will for you the next day, and the next day, you will end up in God's perfect will for you. If you wake up tomorrow morning and say, God, I want your will for my life. I'm going to concentrate on today. Let me be sensitive to your spirit today. Let me be sensitive to your prompting today. Let me do what you have for me today. That's what I'm going to worry about right now. And tomorrow, I'll worry about tomorrow. If you do that daily, then it's inevitable you're going to end up where God has called you to be. You don't need to worry about the end result. You need to worry about now. I'm the type of person, man, that I'm constantly like looking for what's next. Constantly. Like every phase of my life, I'm like, I can't wait till that happens. And then that happens. I'm like, oh, I can't wait till that happens. And when my baby was born, I think she was like a month old. And like a moron, I don't even know why I was thinking this way. I made a comment to my wife. I was like, oh, I can't wait till she like says daddy or something, or I can't wait till she walks. I forget what I said. And my wife was just like, she said it in love, but she was like, I don't think we should like just wish away this time. Like, I can't wait till she does this, because it's easy to do. But she's like, we should just enjoy her now. Like, we're never going to have this time with her again. And that hit home for me so much, because I was like, what am I doing? I'm never going to have her this small again. And I'm already thinking about, I can't wait till she does this. Why can't I just sit and enjoy who she is right now? And you know what? Just like my heart for my daughter is like that, man, God's heart for you is like that. He's saying, man, you don't need to wait to minister. You don't need to wait to live out your calling until you have a wife, a house, and a job. I want you to enjoy life now. I want you to enjoy the process. Man, I want you to walk with me throughout the process, through the day-to-day, through tough times, through good times. Don't just think about the future. Think about the present. I came so that you would have life to the fullest. And the fullest doesn't mean stressing about what's next. The fullest means, man, living day to day, living saying, God, I give my life to you today. Use me today. Why is there such a process between the promise and the payoff? It's because the process is the point. It's because that's where God shapes us. I love sports. I'm a sports fiend, and it happens almost on a weekly basis where there'll be a family party or something with the church or something that I can't watch a game that I wanted to, and I'll DVR it. And it always happens this way. My phone will buzz, and I'll think it's a text message, and I'll pull it out, and it's ESPN, and I'll see Giants won 24-21. And I'm like, ugh. Because once I know the score, I don't want to go back and watch the game, right? I'm like, what's the point of watching a 3-hour game if I know the outcome, right? Listen, God doesn't want you to be concerned about the outcome right now. He wants you to focus on the game, the waiting game. When God shapes greatness, there's always a process. And you know what? The process is always painful when the payoff is profound. Because the process makes the payoff that much sweeter. If Joseph grew up in Pharaoh's family and then just graduated to that position, it'd be whatever, right? But now when we step back and we look at the process that led Joseph to that position, it's one of the most incredible testimonies I think there is in the Bible, because of the process that he went through. So again, don't forfeit the payoff because you fainted or gave up in the process. If you guys want to stand, I just want to close. If the band, I'm not sure how you guys were planning on closing, but if the band wants to come up, I just want to read to you guys 2 scriptures that you all have heard. But I want you to just listen to these again in the mindset of just saying, God, this is hard. I'm not trying to make this sound easy. The process isn't going to be easy, okay? I'm not going to sit up here and make it sound easier than it is. It's going to be tough. But to go through it and say, God, I know this is going to be tough, but I'm going to make a conscious effort to trust in you. I'm going to make a conscious effort to live for your will for my life today and tomorrow and the next day. And I'm going to trust that you have my best intentions in mind. I'm going to trust that you have everything that you've promised me. Isaiah 40 says this: He gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak. Even youths grow tired and weary, and young men stumble and fall. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. Matthew 11, Jesus says, Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. So what I'd like to do just for a few minutes, because you know what, if I close right now, we're just going to talk and hang out and go home and maybe forget to do this. I just want to take a minute. If you guys want to play something, and if you just want to get in your own spot and just have a little bit of quiet time for a few minutes to just kind of maybe reflect on where you're at in life. Listen, let me tell you this too. It is frustrating going through a process, okay? And so many people think that they have to put on this face for God. They have to put on this good attitude for God. Let me tell you something. God is a big God, and God is big enough for your frustrations. Listen, if you're frustrated with God, if you're angry with God, if you feel lost and abandoned, tell God. He knows it anyways. Just because you're not verbalizing it doesn't mean he doesn't see it. God knows how you feel, man. Be real with God. Get that junk out. That's not meant to keep in and to fester and to build up inside of you, man. Take some quiet time. Say, God, I'm frustrated. I don't understand. What is this about? Air it out, man. And then take that step of faith to say, but God, I trust you. I'm not going to walk away. I'm not going to wander. I'm not going to grow weary. I'm not going to faint. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to trust in you. Give me strength through the day-to-day. Give me what I need to get through this process. And I'm trusting you for the fulfillment. So why don't we do that? Why don't you just, if it's at your seat, if you want to walk around, if you want to just get away from everyone else, just take a few minutes, man. Reflect on where you're at. Reflect on what you feel like God's called you to. Air it out with God, man. Have a little conversation with Jesus right now.